Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy.
Gentlemen, we've finally acquired it,
said the man at the head of the table, his voice barely above a whisper.
The Lamp of Desires. Legend has it that this artifact can grant any wish we make.
The others leaned in, their eyes fixed on the lamp. One of them, a portly man with thinning hair, cleared his throat. Are we sure about this, Richard? It seems too good to be true. Richard's lips curled into a smile.
I assure you, George, it's very real. My sources are impeccable. This is our chance to take Apex Industries to heights we've only dreamed of. A younger executive with slicked back hair and a sharp jawline spoke up. So what's the plan? How do we use it? Simple, Michael, Richard replied. We each make a wish that will benefit the company. But we must be careful. The lamp's power is great, but it can be unpredictable.
The room fell silent as the men contemplated their options. Finally, the fourth man, tall and lean with glasses perched on his nose, broke the silence. I'll go first, he said, reaching for the lamp. Wait, David, the fifth man cautioned. We should think this through carefully. But David had already grasped the lamp. His eyes closed in concentration as he made his wish. I wish for Apex Industries to have the most innovative and groundbreaking products in every market we enter. The lamp began to glow, a soft golden light emanating from within. The men held their breath, waiting for something miraculous to happen, but as the glow faded, they looked around in confusion. Did it work? George asked, his brow furrowed. Before anyone could answer, Michael grabbed the lamp. My turn, he said eagerly. I wish for Apex to have an unbeatable marketing strategy that will make us the most recognizable brand in the world. Again, the lamp glowed, but nothing seemed to change in the room. The executives exchanged puzzled glances. One by one, they each made their wish. George wished for unparalleled financial success. The fifth man, Tom, wished for a global network of influential connections. And finally, Richard made his wish. I wish for Apex Industries to have the most capable and efficient workforce in the business world, he said solemnly. As the lamp's glow faded for the final time, the men sat back, a mixture of anticipation and doubt on their faces. Well, Richard said, breaking the silence, I suppose we'll have to wait and see the results. Let's reconvene tomorrow and assess any changes. They nodded in agreement and began to gather their things. As they stood to leave, Michael suddenly stumbled, clutching his head. I feel strange, he mumbled. The others turned to look at him, but their concern quickly turned to shock as they watched Michael's appearance begin to change. His broad shoulders narrowed, his jawline softened, and his hair grew longer. In a matter of moments, where Michael had stood was now a young woman with long, dark hair and delicate features. Before they could react, the transformation spread. One by one, each of the executives felt a wave of dizziness wash over them, followed by the unsettling sensation of their bodies reshaping themselves. Clothes that had fit perfectly moments ago now hung loose in some places and tight in others. When it was over, 5 confused and frightened women stood where the male executives had been. They stared at each other in disbelief, touching their faces and bodies as if to confirm that what they were seeing was real. What happened? David's voice came out high-pitched and unfamiliar. Richard, now a petite woman with auburn hair, looked at the lamp with a mix of anger and fear. The lamp? It must have misinterpreted our wishes somehow. George, transformed into a curvy woman with blonde hair, let out a hysterical laugh. Misinterpreted? This is a disaster! How are we supposed to run a company like this? Tom, now a tall, athletic-looking woman with short black hair, tried to calm everyone down. Let's not panic. There must be a way to reverse this. We just need to think logically. They spent the next hour trying to use the lamp to undo their transformation, but no matter what they wished for, nothing changed. The lamp remained inert, as if its power had been exhausted. It's no use, Richard finally said, slumping into a chair. We're stuck like this, at least for now. Michael, who had been quiet for a while, spoke up. "So what do? We can't just walk out of here looking like this. Our entire lives have changed in an instant." They all looked at each other, the gravity of their situation sinking in. They were no longer the powerful male executives they had been just hours ago. Now they were women, thrust into a world they were entirely unprepared for. "First things first," Tom said, taking charge. "We need to find some clothes that fit. Then we need to figure out how to explain this to our families, our colleagues, everyone." The others nodded in agreement, still shell-shocked but beginning to think practically. They raided the companies lost and found, piecing together outfits that more or less fit their new bodies. As they dressed, they couldn't help but feel awkward and out of place. "I can't believe I'm wearing a skirt," George grumbled, tugging at the hem of a black pencil skirt.
"At least you found one that fits,"
David retorted, struggling with a blouse that was too tight across the chest. As they fumbled with their new wardrobes, they began to realize just how much they had taken for granted as men. Simple tasks like fastening a bra or walking in heels proved to be unexpected challenges.
"How do women do this every day?"
Michael wondered aloud, wobbling slightly in a pair of low heels.
"We're about to find out,"
Richard replied grimly. Once they were all dressed, they gathered around the conference table once more, this time as a group of women rather than men. The reality of their situation was starting to sink in, and with it came a host of new concerns. "What about our families?" David asked, twirling a strand of long hair nervously. "How do we explain this to our wives? Our children?" The room fell silent as they contemplated the enormity of the changes they would have to make in their personal lives. Marriages, friendships, family dynamics, everything would be affected by their transformation.
"One step at a time,"
Richard said, trying to sound confident despite the tremor in her new, softer voice.
"First, we need to secure our positions in the company. We can't let this situation jeopardize everything we've worked for."
They spent the next few hours strategizing, trying to come up with a plan that would allow them to maintain control of Apex Industries while adapting to their new identities. It was decided that they would present themselves as distant relatives of their former selves, brought in to take over key positions due to a sudden family emergency. As night fell, they realized they couldn't stay in the office forever. They would have to venture out into the world, facing the reality of their new lives head-on.
"We should stick together, at least for tonight," Tom suggested. "Safety in numbers, and we can help each other figure things out."
The others agreed, and they decided to check into a hotel nearby. As they left the office building, they were acutely aware of the looks they received from passers-by. What had once been confident strides were now uncertain steps, their bodies moving in unfamiliar ways. At the hotel, they encountered their first major challenge as women, checking in. The clerk looked at them suspiciously when they tried to use their corporate credit cards, which still bore their male names. "I'm sorry, but I can't accept these," the clerk said, frowning. "The names don't match." Quick-thinking Tom stepped in.
"Oh, those are our brother's cards. We're here on family business, you see. Perhaps we could pay cash instead."
The clerk hesitated, but eventually agreed. As they made their way to their rooms, the group breathed a collective sigh of relief.
"That was close,"
Michael said, collapsing onto one of the beds. "We're going to have to be more careful." As they settled into their rooms, the reality of their situation truly began to sink in. Simple tasks like using the bathroom or changing clothes became awkward adventures in navigating their new bodies.
"I never realized how much I took for granted,"
David mused, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Being a man was so uncomplicated. The others murmured in agreement, each lost in their own thoughts about the challenges that lay ahead. As they prepared for bed, another issue arose. None of them had appropriate sleepwear. After some discussion, they decided to make do with the hotel's complimentary robes, though the silk fabric felt strange against their newly sensitive skin. Sleep didn't come easily that night. They tossed and turned, their minds racing with questions and concerns about the future. How would they run the company? How would they explain their absence to their families? And most pressingly, how would they learn to navigate the world as women? The next morning brought a new set of challenges. They awoke to the realization that they had no makeup, no hair products, and no idea how to style themselves as women. After a frantic call to the concierge, they managed to secure some basic cosmetics and hair accessories. "Has anyone here ever applied makeup before?" George asked, staring blankly at the array of products spread out on the bathroom counter. The room fell silent. None of them had any experience with makeup, beyond occasionally seeing their wives or girlfriends apply it. "How hard can it be?" Michael said, reaching for a tube of mascara. "We're intelligent, successful people. We can figure this out." What followed was a comedy of errors as they attempted to apply makeup for the first time. Lipstick smeared, eyeliner went awry, and more than one of them nearly poked their eye out with a mascara wand.
This is impossible,
David groaned, wiping off a third attempt at applying eyeshadow. "How do women do this every day?" "Practice, I suppose," Richard replied, surprisingly managing a somewhat decent application of lipstick. Like anything else, it probably gets easier with time. As they struggled with their appearances, they also grappled with the realization that their entire way of moving through the world had changed. Simple actions like sitting or standing suddenly required conscious thought to appear feminine and natural.
"Stop spreading your legs when you sit,"
Tom hissed at George, who was sprawled in a decidedly unfeminine manner on one of the beds.
"Ladies don't sit like that."
George blushed and quickly crossed her legs, looking uncomfortable. "This feels so unnatural," she complained.
"We don't have a choice," Richard reminded them. "If we're going to pull this off, we need to convince everyone that we're women. That means acting like it, even when it feels strange." After what felt like hours, they finally deemed themselves presentable enough to face the world. They had managed passable makeup and hair, though their clothes from the day before were wrinkled and ill-fitting. "First order of business," Michael declared. "We need to go shopping. We can't keep wearing these clothes."
The others nodded in agreement, though the prospect of shopping for women's clothing filled them with a mix of anxiety and embarrassment. As they left the hotel and stepped out onto the busy city street, they were immediately struck by how differently the world treated them. Men's gazes lingered on them in a way that made them uncomfortable, and they found themselves instinctively walking closer together for safety. "Is this what women deal with all the time?" David wondered aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "I guess so," Tom replied, her eyes darting around warily. "I never realized." Their first stop was a department store, where they were immediately overwhelmed by the sheer variety of women's clothing options. Styles, sizes, cuts, it was all foreign territory. "How are we supposed to know what size we are?" George asked, holding up a blouse with a bewildered expression. "Trial and error, I suppose," Richard sighed, grabbing a few items in different sizes. "Let's each grab some things and meet at the fitting rooms." The fitting room experience proved to be another adventure in awkwardness. They fumbled with clasps and zippers, contorting themselves to reach fastenings in unfamiliar places.
"I think I'm stuck,"
came Michael's muffled voice from one of the stalls. "This dress is trying to kill me." After much struggle and more than a few moments of frustration, they emerged with a basic wardrobe that at least fit properly. As they paid for their purchases, using cash to avoid any issues with their credit cards, they couldn't help but feel a small sense of accomplishment. "We did it," Tom said, a hint of pride in her voice. "Our first successful shopping trip as women." The others managed weak smiles, the reality of their situation still weighing heavily on them. As they left the store, now dressed in their new clothes, they felt marginally more confident. But their journey was far from over. They still had to figure out how to run their company, explain their situation to their loved ones, and navigate a world that now saw them very differently. "What's our next move?" David asked as they walked down the street, their shopping bags swinging at their sides. Richard took a deep breath. her mind racing with possibilities. "We need to go back to the office. It's time to put our plan into action and introduce ourselves as the new leadership of Apex Industries." The others nodded, a mix of determination and apprehension on their faces. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, but they had no choice but to adapt and overcome. As they made their way back to the familiar, yet now strangely intimidating office building, they steeled themselves for the next phase of their unexpected journey. The lobby of Apex Industries felt different as they walked in, their heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Heads turned, curious glances following them as they made their way to the elevator. The security guard at the desk did a double take, clearly not recognizing them. "Excuse me, ladies?" he called out. "Do you have an appointment?" Richard stepped forward, mustering all the confidence she could.
"We're here to see the executive team. It's a matter of utmost importance." The guard looked skeptical. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any appointments scheduled for—" "It's a family matter," Tom interjected smoothly. "I'm sure if you call up to Richard's office, they'll confirm we're expected." The guard hesitated for a moment before reaching for his phone. The group held their breath as he spoke quietly into the receiver. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded and waved them through. "You can go up. They're expecting you," he said, still looking slightly confused. As the elevator doors closed behind them, they let out a collective sigh of relief. "That was close," Michael whispered. "It's only going to get harder from here," Richard reminded them. "Remember the plan. We're distant relatives, brought in to take over key positions due to a family emergency. Stick to the story and don't let anyone rattle you." The elevator dinged and they stepped out onto the executive floor. Their former secretary, Amanda, looked up from her desk, her eyes widening in surprise. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone professional but curious. Richard stepped forward. "Yes, we're here to see the executive team. It's regarding the family situation." Recognition flickered in Amanda's eyes. She had been briefed on the cover story. "Of course," she said, standing up. "They're waiting for you in the conference room. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be lovely, thank you," Richard replied, trying to sound natural.
As they filed into the conference room, they were met with the confused and slightly hostile stares of their former subordinates. The department heads and senior managers they had worked with for years now looked at them as strangers. Richard cleared her throat, acutely aware of how different her voice sounded. "Thank you all for meeting with us on such short notice. I know this is unexpected." She launched into the prepared explanation, introducing each of them as relatives of the former executives, brought in to take over due to a sudden family emergency that had called the men away indefinitely. As she spoke, she could see the doubt and skepticism on the faces before her. One of the managers, a man named Brian, who had always been a bit of a troublemaker, spoke up. "With all due respect," he said, his tone anything but respectful, "how do we know you're qualified to run this company? We've never even heard of you before today." George, always quick to anger in her former life, started to retort hotly but caught herself. Instead, she took a deep breath and responded with a calmness that surprised even her. "We understand your concerns, Brian. It's natural to be skeptical of such a sudden change. But I assure you, we have been groomed for these positions our entire lives. We may be new faces to you, but we know this company inside and out." Tom jumped in, her new athletic build lending her an air of authority. "We're not here to disrupt what works. We're here to build on the foundation that's already been laid. But make no mistake, we are in charge now, and we expect your full cooperation." The room fell silent as the managers processed this information. Finally, one of the senior VPs spoke up. "What about our ongoing projects? The Maxwell deal? The new product launch?" Michael leaned forward, her long hair falling over her shoulder. "All of that will proceed as planned. We've been fully briefed on all current initiatives. In fact, we have some ideas for improvements that we'd like to discuss with each of you individually over the coming days." As the meeting continued, the executives found themselves falling into familiar patterns of leadership, albeit in unfamiliar bodies. They answered questions, outlined plans, and gradually began to win over the room. By the time the meeting ended, there was still an air of uncertainty, but the open hostility had faded. As the managers filed out, Richard overheard snippets of conversation.
They seem to know their stuff. Did you see how they handled Brian? Maybe this won't be so bad. I don't know. Something feels off about this whole thing.
Once they were alone, the group let out a collective breath.
That went better than I expected,
David said, running a hand through her long hair.
It's a start, Richard agreed. But we've got a long way to go. We need to prove ourselves every day in every meeting with every decision.
As they settled into their new offices, spaces that had once been intimately familiar but now felt strangely alien, they began to grapple with the practical challenges of running a company as women. Michael found herself struggling with the company's financial software, her long nails making typing difficult. How do women function with these things? She muttered, backspacing for the 10th time. In another office, George was on a conference call with some of their biggest clients. She winced as she heard her high-pitched voice echoing back through the speaker. Would the clients take her seriously? Would they sense that something was off? Tom, meanwhile, was in a meeting with the HR department discussing company policies. She found herself seeing things from a completely different perspective. Have we always had such a low percentage of women in leadership roles? She asked, frowning at the statistics in front of her. As the day wore on, they each faced unique challenges. David had to excuse herself from a meeting when her underwire started digging uncomfortably into her side. Richard struggled to be heard in a room full of men who seemed determined to talk over her. By the time evening rolled around, they were exhausted, physically from the unfamiliar strain of their new bodies, and mentally from the constant vigilance required to maintain their charade. They regrouped in Richard's office, collapsing onto the leather sofa with sighs of relief.
I never realized how hard women have it in the corporate world,
Tom said, kicking off her heels with a groan.
The constant underestimation, the subtle dismissals, it's exhausting.
The others nodded in agreement.
Their day had been eye-opening in more ways than one.
So what now? George asked, massaging her sore feet.
We can't keep staying at the hotel. We need to figure out our living situations, our families.
The room fell silent as they contemplated the enormity of the changes still to come. Their old lives were slipping away, and they had no choice but to forge ahead into this new, uncertain future. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.